Good afternoon and welcome to Antithesis.
Antithesis is a weekly radio soiree of stimulating commentary and entertaining conversation discussing issues of importance in our daily lives.
Antithesis airs Sunday afternoon at 5:30.
I'm Richard Curtis.
I'm Leo Griep-Ruiz.
The opinions expressed on Antithesis are the opinions of the person speaking them,
and do not necessarily represent the views of the board, staff, or management of KGNU or of us here at Antithesis.
Because I might not agree with him.
And I might not agree with him. Most of us were wide awake and it happened anyway. Right under our noses, all that bad stuff we said was going to happen someday in the future crept up and bit us on the butt. But our buttocks were so numb from sitting on our laurels that we didn't feel a thing. Look around. ATMs and credit cards have made every purchase we make, virtually every step we take, immediately accessible to any nosy bank official, police officer, or government employee with a computer terminal. Surveillance satellites are in geostatic orbit covering the Earth from all angles, and any of us can easily think of at least a dozen other ways that we are being watched. The guarantees of a living wage for high school graduates and of upper middle class income for college graduates have gone the way of the rotary dial telephone. It's not enough that the Ku Klux Klan voluntarily patrols parts of the U.S.-Mexico border, or that the border is being militarized with Army, Marine, and National Guard troops. The U.S. government is building sections of steel wall and actual iron curtain to keep us cockroach people from the South out. We're not living in a global village, we're living in a global fortified hamlet. Let's face it, 1984 was right on schedule, and the brave new world order is the organizing principle of the American way of life on the eve of the 21st century. Meanwhile, our youth are going crazy. No matter how far they try to fly to test their wings, no matter which way they turn, whatever behavioral modalities they develop to call their own are immediately commodified and sold back at them at inflated prices they cannot afford on their minimum wage MAC paycheck. National unemployment is officially at about 6%, but that statistic is based on the number of individuals receiving unemployment benefits as compared to the total workforce. Once someone's unemployment benefits run out, they're not included in the statistics. This is fraud. It's like saying that children who are not in school are not children. If the unemployment statistics were to include every person between the ages of 18 and 65 who does not have a living wage job and wants one, the actual unemployment statistics would be at least 20 to 30%. Conservatives are predictably cutting back on health, education, and social services. In the meantime, so-called liberalism has so perverted the humanistic ideals espoused in the U.S. Constitution that the enjoyment of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness has come to mean championing the right of women to serve in combat units where they can fight and die alongside of the people of color with whom they share second-class status in the society which they are sworn to protect. What is to be done in a country which calls itself a Christian nation, whose politicians, with virtually no exception, support capital punishment, and where those persons who espouse the anti-violent teachings of the biblical Jesus are ridiculed to the point of complete alienation from the rest of the so-called Judeo-Christian society? Or, to raise up the specter of an issue which haunts some people, which possesses them to the point of clamoring for an exorcism, what shall we do within the confines of a nation-state which claims for its motto E pluribus unum, but which defines cultural diversity as the hiring of people of color who walk, talk, think, dress, and act just like European Americans? Does "we are one composed of many" mean that everyone gets dumped into a blender and that the macerated slurry slowly pouring out is the indeterminate glop which we should aspire to become in order to participate in the American dream? Or is the American dream something which we're still not done dreaming into reality? It's very interesting that the ones who demand that we non-European Americans give up our cultures and join them for a hot dip in the melting pot are the ones who have nothing to lose, since it's their culture which they want to impose on us. they're the same ones who scold us for getting emotional when we lay claim to our basic human rights, to our languages, cultures, lands, and spiritual practices. We, who live on the edge of cultural and or physical genocide, understand very well that the one who does not get emotional under such conditions is the one who has nothing at stake. It's time to wake up and smell the menudo, people. Check it out. The only thing that's melting is the melting pot itself. Cool.
I like that, melting pot melting.
Yep, we've been saying it for a while. So, that's what I have to offer for Antithesis this afternoon. You know, what you listeners have to offer to Antithesis this afternoon is to call 447-9911 and let the radio station know what you think. And this time we're saying this at the very beginning of the show, which is dangerous because the people that can't stand us haven't had a chance to tune out yet.
And joining us in the studio this evening, Carolyn Johnson from the Citizens Coal Council.
Yep, and I said afternoon and Richard said evening, so right away we start out disagreeing, even though he
good.
did agree with me at the beginning. Well, he liked it. He didn't say he agreed. Well, Carolyn, you're from southern Missouri.
Right.
The barbecue country, serious barbecue country.
Very serious barbecue country. Collard greens.
Collard greens with vinegar and sugar?
No sugar.
No sugar?
No
You
sugar.
don't, you don't make them sweet? Oh.
Heavens, no.
Oh, I like it. I like it sweet and sour myself.
Well, it's because you didn't grow up there.
Oh, that's because I don't. We're not agreeing here. You're right. I didn't grow up there.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if it's universal, but my first taste of collard greens came from black folks in Southern California, and I don't know if that's like strictly an Africans in America thing in Southern California, if that's something that is more general than that. All I know is that's how I like them. So here we are. What do you think, man? I said 1984 was right on schedule, and we're on the flip side of it, man, and it's just getting badder in the bad sense. Negative.
Negative sense.
Yeah, not bad in the positive sense, like bad, but bad like, ugh.
Which is an interesting thing to say 13 years later, but people haven't really talked about it.
Nope.
And I think you make an interesting point.
Well, thank you.
That, when George Bush described this vision he called the New World Order,
Yeah.
what was he talking about? And it could be, you know.
Well, wasn't it what some of these bogus cats are calling the end of history? I mean, come on, what a head up there than attitude than to say that with the end of the East-West tensions expressed with the socialist bloc on one side of things and the capitalist bloc. How come they never said capitalist bloc? How come there's always socialist bloc?
Well, actually, that end of history thing is just the desperate attempts of the intellectually inferior to glom onto one of the things that Marx said, which was that socialist revolution marks the end of prehistory and the beginning of actual real human history. So they're just trying to turn that around.
To me, that's also kind of silly.
pitiful.
That's also kind of silly what Carl said. Because,
Well,
history is just history. History is just like what happened.
It's the idea that class struggle defines one moment in the human experience, which obviously transcends many thousands of years, but that class struggle is just a very limited happening in our history, and that it's actually retarding our cultural and intellectual growth. So when he described it as the end of prehistory, what he meant is that from the end of class struggle on, we are able to freely develop as actual real human beings, which is an interesting notion in capitalist America.
Well, what about this business of we have been accused by at least one listener of being redundant in our discussions of culture, and I was looking forward to having Carolyn actually talk about some of that, because tell us about
Culture.
Tell you about culture.
Your culture.
Yeah. I mean,
Bible Belt culture.
Well, my own culture is made up of many different. You were talking about food earlier, asking us what we ate, where I grew up, and you remembered eating the same thing with Black Americans, African Americans in L.A. or something similar. They seasoned it differently. So the food and other cultural things that show the culture, I think, take on many things, aspects of other people's. And if anything, I don't know who had collard greens first.
Where collards from? Are they? Where collards
that would be where
originally from?
whoever had them first.
Well, I think they were grown in the South, but where the plant comes from, I don't know. I don't know if it's a New World plant or an Old World
Yeah,
plant.
I don't know about collards. I know that a lot of those foods, like mustard greens, are based on wild stuff. I mean, the things were bad enough, again, bad in a negative sense on the plantations that people adopted those things which they could get to.
Well, mustard greens, turnip greens, wild spinach, wild dandelions, all mixed greens that were also part of what we grew up on, are some of the most delicious things in the world and extremely nutritious. It wasn't necessarily done because it was bad in poke salad. Now there's something I just highly recommend, but you can't eat it in Colorado. They were very, and still are, I mean, extremely nutritious, and they grew, or their wild cousins grew, in that area. And it's a matter of picking out good food and eating it.
Yeah, well, the point I'm making about that is that the scene on the plantation was such that people had to basically.
Most people did not live on a plantation.
No. I'm going way back now. I'm going back to saying how it is that these particular foodstuffs got into a certain part of the diet, like thinking in terms of African Americans.
Well, it wasn't necessarily because they were starving on the plantations. I mean,
it was not because that was stuff that was more available to them, and what they got from the massa was not necessarily that good.
Right. I mean, you can find dandelion green. Dandelion is a European plant, but came over very early and colonized very quickly. But the equivalent here, but you can find them easily, and a lot of the Native Americans ate some of these things.
Because I know that like...
now, sweet potatoes, they came from Africa. Who brought them first, I don't know.
I know that living in L.A., there was a time when I would go around and pick the chard that just grows wild in L.A., and mustard greens and stuff like that, as well as, nasturtiums and other things. So there's stuff like...
And poke salad, nasturtium is an old world plant, but poke salad is something that is native to that part of the upper South and lower South. So I think there's a movie star thing that, if I can almost insult you, maybe I will insult you.
Oh, go ahead.
That Southern, or I was actually from the upper South, was all plantation economy. Hell, we didn't know what a plantation was. We'd never seen such a thing. And certainly, I mean, I'm at not of the age that I would have ever grown up on one that was long gone, but it's sort of like Gone with the Wind is still around. And it wasn't like that at all. I mean, they were poor dirt farmers. That's what they were.
Missouri.
Yeah, Missouri.
That's Missouri.
Right.
What's the difference between a sweet potato and a yam?
They've made distinctions now, but they're all in the same family. You can go to the store, and there are some things that are yams and some that are sweet potatoes, but...
And no one actually knows.
I can tell you how they taste differently, but when you buy them, one is going to be more reddish and one more orangish. And, it's not a whole world of difference. But.
So what are we going to get into culinary?
No,
I think I think culinary is one of the clearest examples of culture, because foods have far more. You were talking to me on the way up about some earrings or some piece of jewelry that you'd had they're made in the shape of corns of ear. Ears of corn. I mean, not corns of ears, ears of corn.
Well, they were worn in ears because they were...
Right. Well, think about corn, and you know that. Corn in the society that you come out of.
Yeah.
Or the
Staple.
cultures.
There's a thing that
so
again...
foods have far more meaning than just eating to sustain the body.
Right. I mean, foods are used as one of those measures of ethnicity, as a matter of fact, among sociologists, like what kind of things you choose to eat. What I was interested in, again, at the risk of being redundant, because this issue has come up frequently in the discussions that Richard and I have here, this is the question of culture. Frantz Fanon, in, I forget, one of his 4 books, discusses how in circumstances of colonization there comes a period when, especially to the younger people, that which the metropolis, that's his term for the colonizing force, how that which the metropolis has to offer is irresistibly attractive. And that then, as at some point there comes a change, that people who are colonized see that what the metropolis has to offer is in fact without relevant substance for them, and then they return to their original culture, but now not in the unreflexive way that they lived within that culture prior to their colonization. Now every aspect of that culture is revitalized as a weapon against the colonizer.
That's the point where Leo and I have a problem. This idea that culture is a weapon, or a useful weapon. I'll acknowledge it's a weapon, but I dispute that it's a useful weapon.
A useful weapon
in terms of dealing with all of the various issues that come down around colonization.
Well, in this case, especially for Native American peoples in the United States context, to deal with injustice.
Indigenous peoples in general. And this, you see, because I'm curious about this from your perspective, given the reality of white folks in the South, or at least in those what I'll call the southern regions that you're from, with that flow of cultures. And this is why I'm glad to have you here, because I know about my stuff, you know, and there's come a point where there's so much for me to learn in terms of Mesoamerican reality that I'm focused around that. I mean, there's just a limit to how much my puny little brain can absorb, you know, and I'm real interested in, for example, the various regional dialects. I understand that the southern, what's called the southern accent, for example, which I know is not just a southern accent, that there's a whole variety of, you know, Texas is one thing, the plains is something else, southeastern parts of the South is something else, central eastern seaboard is something else, that those things have their roots in people coming from certain parts of, well, I guess England and Western and Northern Europe and stuff like that.
Well, I think first of all I should be clear about something. I'm not all white, nor was the culture I grew up in. I'm that melting pot that's burning. In my own family, probably African American as well, and I realize I have the blue eyes and the blonde hair that you might think was Northern European, but things did sort of mix up. But a great deal of Native American on both sides of my family, and some of the culture was part of that. I think that the culture as a weapon is something that literally does happen, and it's part of that. You can go home again. You know, Thomas Wolfe wrote the book, You Can't Go Home Again, and I disagree. I think people do go home again, and I think that culture is what they go home to. And culture is as much part of place, or can be, but it's really something that's transported, and I think that is the weapon. Maybe a weapon is not so much the term I would use, but an armor. It's what you can filter through what happens to you, are the events that you observe in a way that puts them in context. And I think that cultures do mix. There's no such thing as probably a pure culture any place on the earth. There may be on one Philippine mountain that I've heard about, but, you know,
and even then we have the questions of the indigenous people of the area, and then Malaysian people traveling around.
I mean, things. But I think that there is that, and so that it does transform. Cultures transform over the time, but they are very distinct. And I'm in my own family and our near relatives and friends. Our culture was probably very different, and our accent is different than people the next county over.
Now, there was something that happened, I know in Appalachia for sure, and I'm not sure how much this was true in southern Missouri, or Missouri.
Missouri is, yes.
As the locals put it.
That at one time there was a linguistic isolation.
Yes.
Similar to what occurred for a long time in northern New Mexico and southern Colorado.
Right.
And that then with more than anything else, I guess, radio coming in and then television coming in, that a lot of that isolation was broken down, and that now there is less and less of an accent or of regional dialect. I don't know if that's the right word to use. And in fact, I've heard recent commentary from people in the South who have, Southern inflections, saying that their children are growing up without that.
I think TV is the big leveler, not radio, but TV is the great leveler of that. And I can talk Southeast Missouri, but mine is really a mixture now. I tend to pick up what I'm around, and I've been in Colorado for years and years. But I go home, and the first week I'm back, I talk Southeast Missouri, and it gets a little heavy sometimes. But
I come back from a Chicano conference for the National Chicano Human Rights Council, and just running with flat out raza for a week or something. I come back and my wife starts laughing, because I've fallen right back into all of these modalities, that between us are not always occurring, and she's cracking up because here I am, with like you have to stand a certain distance away because of the gesturing, and my inflections, and I don't even notice it. I'm interested in this idea of revitalization. Do you see a process of revitalization of culture occurring among those people that you grew up with? Do you see?
No, I have not. Now, I haven't spent a lot of time at home. I still call it a home, but I still do go back. But I'm not. But I do see it in Appalachia, and I've spent a lot of time in Appalachia because of my work. It's not a revitalization. They've never lost a lot of it. And a very much of a prideful distinction that this is our Appalachian culture. And it's interesting to me that the most prevalent cultures are the cultures that we value tend never to come out of super elite people on an economic scale or super rich or anything. I mean, what's that culture? Maybe ways of behaving, but your cultures, I think, there's some sort of economic connection, and I can't even go further to explain what that is, but it's just struck me that there is. But in Appalachia, the music, the language, and now in Southeast Missouri, the accents are being lost, although everybody does still say Missouri, but the expressions are not. And so you hear the expressions in Walter Cronkite, homogenized English, but a lot of the expressions that are characteristic of that area are still there. One of the things they do, for example, is say double prepositions. Let's see, I've got to go up against things. If you can use two, that's really good. If you can get three in a phrase, I mean, you're really hot. So they'll say this, but it'll be in Walter Cronkite or Barbara Walters without the slight lisp that she has. And that kind of, and it sounds really funny. It really hits my ear when I hear it, because I know there's a linguist fellow here in town, he teaches at the university, who can tell down to the county where you're from in the United States if you've got any of the trace of or grew up in an area very decidedly. I always thought that was a wonderful trait, and it's as much by the accent, but the expressions that are used. So, language is culture, and if there were not different cultures, you wouldn't have different languages. I mean, and language reflects culture, I think.
I'm intrigued by the analogy of culture as an armor in the struggle. Because I think I'm willing to accept that, because I see that as being different than a weapon.
Well, I would say that on the West Coast now, among Chicanos, there's this tremendous revitalization of culture. At one time in the Chicano movement, the polemic that existed, the big argument was, in the late 60s and the early 70s, was, are we citizens of the nation state doing business as the United States of America, or because of the USA's refusal to adhere to the stipulations of the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, are we citizens of La República de los Estados Unidos Mexicanos? right, of Mexico, that's its full name, by the way, is the United States of the Mexican Republic. And now that polemic has shifted among those people who are working, for example, presenting the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo before the Organization of American States and who have taken the issue to the United Nations Human Rights Commission. The polemic has shifted to because of the United States being in default, the government of the United States of America being in default in terms of adhering to the stipulations of the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. Are we citizens of La República de los Estados Unidos Mexicanos, or in fact do we belong to something which predates the existence of that nation state? And
what in the world is that conversation about?
Well, what that conversation is about has to do with seeing the historical lineage to who the people really are, going beyond this the populist or the popular myth of the 60s and 70s. On the heels of Black is Beautiful came this Brown is Beautiful, and that was sort of summed up as Chicanos are half Spanish and half Aztec, and that we are the children of the rape of the Indian woman by the Spanish conquistador, and the idea of being a fifth race, a cosmic race, the bronze race, bastard race, all of these terms have been used. And that whole discussion was empowering to a certain extent, but then the discussion has moved beyond that to understanding the actual processes that led to the existence of this population, of these people known as Chicanos. And I use the term people in its sense of international law because that recognition has been granted at this point to Chicanos as a people under international law. But understanding the true process is that the overwhelming majority of us are not half Spanish, and that also the overwhelming majority of us are not descended from the Aztecs, who were the Mexica Chichimeca who lived in a specific area, and understanding that Chicanos in fact trace their lineage to many, many, many different indigenous peoples.
Well, no, the attraction of the Aztecs was that the Aztecs were a very powerful empire.
Yeah, and like I say, it was empowering at one time, but the research that we have been doing is a research to help people understand what their true lineage is, what their true history is, and not merely being part of yet another defeated empire, but rather understanding that Chicanos are descended of many different indigenous peoples, Yaqui, Tarahumara, Huichol, I could go on and on and on and on and on, with all of the people.
It seems to me there's something very different about what you're talking about compared to the Appalachian example. And I think that the issue is nationalism. Because people in Appalachia are pretty clear that, they're here in the U.S., they're citizens of the U.S., and they're just going to have to live with that, so they need to engage the struggle at that level.
But you know that something's interesting about that? The identity is with the county.
Yeah, it's sort of, they accept that, let it go.
It's the
not
county.
a big deal. But see, and I think the Chicano example that you bring up is focused on this national question, and that question does not solve any of the problems.
Well, but however, the national question is eminently relevant to a people who did not cross a border to get here, to a people who were crossed by a border.
It still doesn't matter. It's just symbolic. It doesn't actually affect people's lives.
That's easy to say outside of the barrio, but in terms of the people's own experience, and especially in terms of the experience of a people, all of whom can name family members or close friends who have been deported because of the imposition of this border, it becomes a very, very, very relevant issue.
Yes, but they're not going to change those laws. I mean, that struggle is not going to affect that reality. I mean, the real issue is, do they have a way to survive? Do they have schools? Do they have health care? I mean, those are the real questions that matter.
Those are real questions, but not necessarily the real question. The border is to us as important a question as these other issues which you're raising.
Are you saying, Richard, that it's impossible for them to change the laws? Because I don't agree with that.
That particular one, that engaging the question of where the border lines in the United States are drawn, is people are simply going to continue to die from poverty while that question is debated, and there's no point in engaging in that question.
Well, now wait a minute. I think you're imposing something here that I don't agree with. You're saying there's no point. You're making a decision for them. I say, hey, if they want to go after changing the laws on the border or whatever else, then that's their right, and they should.
Well, no, because
I do not see that as an impossibility, and I think it's a bit of a put down. If that is the struggle and the surge of what they want, and that's what they go, then go for it.
Well, I guess what I say is that we need them on the broader struggle. The working people as a whole
What do you mean?
need them.
Who are the working people? I mean, I don't know.
Everyone who works for a wage. I mean, we need them in our struggle.
Well,
we need their energy.
Richard, I don't see the working people of this country involved in a struggle. I see some unions that definitely are and are doing very well and are revitalizing, but as a movement of, quote, the working people, goodness, they don't even identify with each other.
I think the
And
most
how can we impose
Exactly,
that value
exactly.
that, quote, that need is greater than what the people in the barrio in L.A. want?
And
I
Richard,
don't think that can be. I
can't watch your back row until I can defend myself. I can't defend you until I can defend myself.
I know. I think it comes down to the question of armor and weapon, but too bad.
Well, there we go. We disagree with each other. Call.
unfortunately.
Hey, don't go away, folks. Call 447-9911, 447-9911, and let us know for real, man, where you're at. If you think that Antithesis is worth continuing to listen to, we are willing to continue doing this, and we will be bringing in more people. I want to thank Carolyn Johnson for being here.
Thanks for
Thank
joining
you.
us, and thanks for listening.